Welcome to another exciting interview here on Kung Fu Conversations. Today we are thrilled to have the world-renowned Chen Taiji instructor from the beautiful Germany. Where are you in Germany, Nabil Ranné?
I'm in the beautiful Berlin.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. So Nabil Ranné, also known as Neb, would you tell us a little bit about your Kung Fu journey so far and what got you started and where are you now on that journey and how has that transitioned a little bit? And then we're going to ask you a bunch of wild, ridiculous questions.
Yeah, sure. I don't know anything about world renowned, but yeah. So then I wouldn't have to introduce myself, right? If I was. So no, but I just I started as a kid with some Taekwondo, and there wasn't really much around because I come from a small village surrounding in central Germany. So it kind of stopped at some point because it was really difficult to get there all the time. But it really fundamentally kind of set up something inside of me, like a certain kind of practice I always wanted to pursue. And then in the early 20s, I met a friend in England and he told me about Tai Chi. And then I kind of went back and looked for a Tai Chi teacher and got a recommendation. And then I started a very practical, very eclectic sort of style, which was nice. It was very practical, so I could have ended up anywhere, like Tai Chi is very diverse, I'd say. So, I picked it up and I basically started, right away to practice sincerely. And, then at some point I discovered Chen Style Taijiquan. And, at some point I saw a photo actually of my teacher now, who's Chen Yu, the son of Chen Zhaokui and grandson of Chen Fake. He lives in Beijing. And when I saw a picture of him, I knew immediately I will study with him one day. And I did that later. In 2007, I started to train with him and intensified my training. And then at some point I came back to Germany and set up in Berlin and started to teach.
That's awesome.
Quick and
very
dirty.
Good. Yeah, that's perfect. That is perfect. That is perfect. You had previous Tai Chi training. And when you started with Chen Yu, what was it like? Was it, let's start all over again? And what was the first few encounters with him like? Or did you have to retrain the nervous system, understand structure from a different point of view? I mean, where did that go for you? What did that look like?
Yeah, it's, I had to kind of start from scratch. But it's like when you go to China and then you kind of need to build a relationship with your teacher. So, otherwise they try to be polite, so they don't really tell you all the real stuff, the serious stuff, because they're like, oh, your practice is good, sort of, because you're not really learning from them. And then, I can understand that. I'm the same. Like if somebody's not learning from me, I'm also like, I'm trying to be polite, So of course, if somebody's learning, then you have to tell them, okay, this is right, this is wrong, this is something you can improve on, and you become a bit more honest in a way. You have to be less polite, the better the relationship is. And I think, in China, they have this guanqi, the relationship, they have a real word for this. And, so it's something you have to cultivate. And when I started with Chen Yu, I went there in winter. So and then it started to snow on the particular day we wanted to meet. So he came to my hotel room and then at some point he said, yeah, you do some form. And then I started doing the form and I came from the village line. So I started to do the 75 form, which people call old frame. Yep. And at some point I thought, oh no, but he's like the son of Chen Fake, so maybe I should do, what I then called the new frame, the Xinjia. And then I switched between the two forms. And he was just like, he had a cigarette, and he was like just laughing about it. He was like, oh, what form are you doing? You start with the 75 and then you end up doing the 83. And I was like smiling, but I was like, oh, maybe it's like politically wrong to do this. So this is basically the first class I started with him. And, we were joking a bit, and then he was basically teaching me the stance, and that was like a completely different animal. So really had to put in a lot of work to get that right.
Very good. Very good. Yep. Starting all over again. There's a humbleness and a modesty that develops in somebody, isn't there? Very good. Very good, my friend.
Sort of to follow up on that, when you look at that Beijing line of Chen Taichi, sort of what are some of the parts in it in terms of, is there stancing and neigong and footwork and just sort of a general definition or a general picture?
That's a difficult question. I think I could make this like an hour long answer. Sure. But you got to direct me into the right direction. Basically the way you learn the whole system is by learning the form, really. But it's not just learning the choreography, but there are a lot of like methods inside. So all the stepping methods, for example, how do you stand? Yeah, all the stance methods, and then all the hand methods, all the neigong is basically, so it's like a progressive system. You kind of, you start learning the choreography, but while you learn the movements, you also learn the methods inside the movements, because you need to work on something, right? You can't just learn the methods and have no movement whatsoever. So, and this is like, so it's, I think it's, once I understood it, I thought it's a really nice system to also make sure that the tradition kind of stays intact, because you start to, like, the way you memorize all the methods, it's really like put together with the movement. So I think it's a really nice system if it's being taught that way. So, then you learn basically how to use Jin, how to create forces with your whole body structure. And at some point in your progression, that will include breathing methods and also like Igong, like mind methods, you could say. But of course, in the beginning, you don't really start with that because it's a bit too, you don't have the body-mind connection yet. So it's not really useful to do that. But yeah, you have the bufa, the stances and the stepping. You have the jangfa, the palm methods. You have the joufa, the elbow methods. You have what they call yaoqiu, which is like the requirements, the basic requirements you have to put into the body. And then, you have neigong methods and so on. Or you could also say like chanfa, which is like the spiraling methods, which is very important for Chen Style Taijiquan, the silk reading. So hope that at least in part answered your question.
It did. Thank you. And I was going to, as sort of a piggyback on that question, I was going to ask you sort of, how does your background in exercise science sort of inform how you train that material or how you teach that material? And I know it's once again, kind of a broad question, but I was thinking in terms of, you've got sort of a Western science background and you learned in sort of a traditional Eastern manner, and sort of how, when those two pieces come together, how does that come out in your practice? And then how does that come out in your teaching?
I think my answer might be a bit disappointing, but actually I'm not really using much of the sports science stuff. Basically what I teach, I think is pretty much from what my teacher taught me. So it's basically very much Eastern methodology. But then I had the luck that my teacher, he's a very diligent, everything is very practical. So, and he explains everything in detail. So it's not like the cliche, where a lot of Westerners think, Asian teachers don't explain things. So with my teacher, it was basically really the opposite. He was explaining a lot, So then he wants to see that you're training the material, of course. I mean, he's not going to explain for the next 3 years when you're not training at all, right? So the relationship thing again. And it doesn't make sense. In East, West, it doesn't make sense. If somebody's not training, you don't have to go on teaching. But so I try to really stick to this, and I find it a very logical and rational method. Of course, I can't think scientifically just as the person I am, and the person has been educated in the West and so on. And of course, I had to translate all the material into Western languages. So into German, but also into English, right? So,
right.
And this definitely shaped my teaching a lot, like thinking about the words, how to best translate it, how to think of the different connotations Chinese words have, because they are very contextual, like it's a high context language, and like German is a very low context language. It's basically almost the opposite, so, and English is probably, I don't know, somewhere in between. And so this is really shaping my understanding how to translate these things. And then I'm sometimes using my sports science stuff when I am talking to like sports organizations here in Germany, for example. Like I've been teaching professional athletes, for example. Like I've been teaching some people in the highest soccer, or if we call it football league here in Germany, or I've been teaching some handball in the highest handball league. I don't know if you know handball, but it's like
very popular back east. Yeah.
Oh,
very
yeah.
popular.
Okay. I thought it's not so popular in the US. So, but it's, and we had a top tennis player once and so on. So when I'm talking to these people, I have to kind of adapt the language in a way that they understand it. But it's not really that my Taiji practice has been influenced a lot by Western methodologies. Sometimes I think probably depending on the person you're teaching, it could help sometimes if they also have an understanding, like anatomical understanding and stuff.
Yeah.
But sometimes it also leads to completely different results. So there, like classical anatomy would be, if you're talking for example, like you're talking about the Quan, I call it the hips, basically. It's a very generalist term in Chinese martial arts in a way. But like if you taught this to Western anatomical or people with anatomical knowledge, they will usually take an image which is not really fitting to the practical things, I guess. Right. Or like. There are certain, we would have to go into the methodology, for example, like what do you do with the perineum? You want to be stable. So the perineum, of course, is like pretty important, how to use the weight of your torso to root it in the feet. So, but if you're talking about it from a Western perspective, people always think about contracting muscles and stuff.
Yes.
Whereas the Eastern methodology is not really so much about contracting, it's more about activating. So that's why they talk about energy, right? Or like they can talk about energy. It's not that they talk about energy all the time, but they would use like acupuncture points, how you can kind of use your mind to change your body structure. So maybe this is a bit complicated. I don't know if I get the point across well, but I think it's sometimes these images or these descriptions of our reality, if they're anatomical Western or if they're Eastern, they will lead to different results. And I think we just have to be aware of it when we practice these arts and also teach them.
Yes. Thank you. That was actually a great answer. And I definitely, I was following what you were saying because I happen to agree with a lot of that as well. I find that sometimes sort of strict anatomical definitions don't necessarily reflect the function and then how it's actually used, and especially in a Chinese model. So thank you.
You're welcome.
What kind of results are your athletes getting, Nabil? Question on that.
Well, I'm not doing it like full time. I'm sure. Sometimes I'm a bit bored to do this kind of work. But it's, basically I was like the soccer people, I was teaching them like stability and tackling skills mainly. And so I think stability, movability, whole body power, some mind training methods, breathing methods also there's a lot of stuff you can really use. But then I'm not teaching them Taiji. I'm coaching them individually. So I would rather, in the beginning, I would just assess what is the thing they need most. And they will benefit from most. And then you have great results because a lot of these things, people are not really talking about it, right? So, like in professional sports, there is a lot of competition and learning from these competitions and you have to kind of, take the challenge and learn from that. But sometimes, like, people would rarely, in my experience, they would rarely talk what to do in tacklings, how to use the force of your opponent and stuff in these kind of sports environments. So this is something you can really teach them really nicely, and they will progress a lot because, in the beginning, when you learn something new, you're basically progressing really quickly, right? And then later, once you're an expert, it's like becoming very slow progress. But so I think there's really a lot we could teach to them, but it's not so easy, like organizational wise. It's because these methods have not been, or they are not accepted,
Would you consider Tai Chi to be one thing, or do you feel like it's a bunch of moving pieces around a theory and a concept? Could you kind of talk about that a little bit, sir?
Yeah, sure. It's I think it kind of depends what perspective I take. If you asked me on a public podcast, what's Taiji Quan? I would probably give a very generalist answer. I would probably take the easy route and say, my definition of Taiji Quan is basically historical. It's not quality oriented, because if I try to define qualities, and I have 3 Taiji people, they will all disagree after, unless you say something very like generalist, like yin and yang. But I mean, then basically the whole world, you could say, is like based on yin and yang, or I mean, every Chinese martial art is based on yin and yang. Every movement is in a way which turns around an axis is about yin and yang. So I don't know. I don't think it's so super useful. So, and I think it's also especially online, it leads to a lot of frustration and lots of discussions which are not so useful. So I think it's more useful to say, okay, it's let's just historically define what is Taiji, and then that's quite clear, I think, from his, you have the certain families, you have the origins, you have a wider region where forms like that have been practiced and so on. So you could say, okay, all these things are Taiji. And if you like them or not, or if they're very good Taiji or they're very bad Taiji, it doesn't really matter. They're all kind of Taiji. You have good basketball, you have bad basketball. It's but you don't say, oh, the bad basketball is not basketball, right? So it's right. You have different leagues and stuff. So I think that's normal. And that would be my sort of external answer. I think I have another answer, which is if you ask me, what is Taiji Quan to you? Or to me, yes. Personally.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there I have a different answer. Then Taiji would be very specifically the Taiji I do, in my lineage. And it would basically have all these very specific methods, which make my Taiji, and I think I would be very specific on what Taiji Quan is to me, sort of.
Awesome. Great answer. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
And could you give us a high level or a quick definition of what Taiji is to you personally?
We gotcha.
Well, I haven't really, I think it's really very feeling based. It's I think it's really linked to the forms, to the 2 forms we do. I mean, the hand forms mainly, and then how you basically, you structure yourselves, the mind also, how what do we do in the practice? How do we contain our mind inside our body? How do we shape our body? And then all the Jin also is very important. All the forms basically about Jin, producing, of course, Pang Jin, like the expansive forces, but also closing forces. And it's very specific how you connect these, we call it Xungyao Zhedi, which is the folding of the chest and the waist, and then it becomes you have this image in one of the old texts, the long fist is like a river rolling incessantly, unstopping, this flowing kind of, and it's more feeling based. But I think all these methods are really, I kind of put them together, and then I have this image of this rolling, feeling of the whole body, sort of. It's like, I don't know if it's the answer you were looking for, but it's very feeling based, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I was going to ask you, and this kind of goes back to where we had started a little bit in your training with Chen Yu. What was the most difficult part of your training with him? Was it, was it in the beginning, or was it in the middle, or was it some sort of methodological difference, or was it, was it the stancing in the beginning, or?
The stance is very difficult. You have to really put in a lot of work to do it right. And also in the beginning, you can't do it right. And this is, your body just can't do it. It doesn't have the strength, but also the flexibility. And also I think there's also a lot of like neurological, how can you access your body, right? In the beginning, you cannot access your body like that. So you can't take that stance. So, and I think just like sticking to it and trusting yourself that you will progress sort of that was definitely difficult. I mean, then learning in China is definitely also difficult in terms of, you have to learn a different culture, language, and so there are differences, it's like, I mean, whenever you move, you can encounter this, but,
yes,
this definitely also one difficulty. And I think this decision at some point, it took me a year or so. I think until I decided I will just focus on his frame. That was also like a difficulty, like for myself to decide, I'm letting go of what I did before, so
sure.
That was also a difficulty. But then in terms of the forms, I think, the stance is difficult, but once you've decided you want to go for it, I think it's a very logical system. It's kind of one building block is kind of built on the other one. So once you've got the stances right, you understand, the role of for example, the hips, the quad, then you understand the role of the waist area. Then you have to think, okay, how can I make Dantian stable? How can I make my body that it has Dantian in the first place, you could say,
right.
And then it kind of, and then I think it's really like putting building block on building block, how to kind of elongate this internal chain of forces. So at some point it reaches the tips. So root and tip are kind of connected, and everything in between can kind of move. And, so that in a way I think it's a very difficult practice, but on the other hand, I find it, because it's so logical, I think it's also easy in a way, And I started to read a lot of like Chinese theory also. And that was also important for me because, I thought it's such a clear system in a way. It's, people always think, Taiji is does it even work, But I think if you really look at the text and you understand the practice, I think it's, very logical and very cleverly devised in a way.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask as a sort of a follow up to that. I know that, Zhaokui, Chen Yu's father, was very, my impression from what I've read was he was very sort of open to science and open to sort of that way of thinking and approaching the material. And I don't know if you have any, impression as to how that may have influenced how he handed down his system, because I know that he was pretty successful as a teacher in passing along his methods to a number of students who became sort of, good and they've done it well. And they've been able to pass it down. And sometimes I look at that transmission from teacher to student as sort of, of course the student's got to play their part, but the teacher also has to play their part, and they have to have the availability of the information. And then they have to have sort of a logical methodology to pass it on. And I was wondering sort of if you had any impression how that sort of has changed from generation to generation. It was like Chen Zhaokui, like, did he really organize the system more, or do you not know? Or I was just kind of curious.
I think it's always, I think I have a good impression of what he did. And, because, like you say, my teacher is his son. So And then I've also read a lot of his texts, and I've also read a lot from his other students writing about the practice. So you get, once you dived into this, you get to understand the gist of what he was teaching and the methodology, right? Like you can kind of see what he was on about, and you understand his words, and also how some of the words changed over time or changed to what his son is teaching and so on. So I think the difficulty is always when we talk about change, what did the older generations teach? Because Chen Fa-ke, okay, we know something, but also we don't know too much about it because, there are no videos from him and stuff.
Right.
And then if you are like one generation before that, you're kind of lost, right? You don't know anything about it really, like about the practical stuff. So you can only kind of theorize about it and kind of analyze it. Chen Zhaokui was definitely, I think he was a very, very smart kid. He was not allowed to go to high school, but that was just because of the times.
Yeah.
And he was teaching, of course, in a very difficult environment. Like China was not yet open, and there were times when we're not allowed to practice any of these old arts because they wanted to kind of transform the society. So a lot of his students, like the context of learning from him was not the best you could imagine. Like if you look at like sports, elite sports training centers nowadays, and you compare it to what opportunities people have there, and if you look at that time, it's like the difference is vast, obvious. Yeah. So, and then you can look at the people, and they really accomplished a lot, I think. Even in those environments, you see, like when you look at the students, you can basically see exactly that they share a certain style. Movement style. So you can kind of think, okay, he was, and then knowing his texts, you know what he was teaching. And I think he was teaching and he had to teach very analytically. He was also using a lot of like modern frameworks, and he was like another bridge really from tradition to modern society, So he was using I think my teacher said he was sometimes traveling with like classical Taiji books, but also like with books on anatomy and stuff. He had a suitcase, was always traveling with it. So I think he was like a real bridge, and with a very deep rooting in traditional knowledge, but also with this drive to have the tradition survive, And then in the 60s, I think 63, he went to Shanghai, for example, to teach at the university there. And then, there are notes by him. He wrote down to kind of plan his courses there. And it's really interesting because he had to structure it in a certain way to break it down to teach it in this environment, because it had not been taught like that before, right? So, and he was really adapting to that really nicely. So, yeah, I think he's a very interesting character, and with a lot of achievement, really.
That's very cool. Thank you.
Nabil, in your own teaching practice, have you added anything that maybe outside of Tai Chi that will actually supplement for your students the training of Tai Chi, whether it be a training tool or a stretching methodology, or do you find it all really contained within the Tai Chi, or have you taken something in your own Tai Chi in the Chen Yu method and kind of piecemealed it out a little bit into new training drills, kind of dialed it down or up, whatever it may be, to maybe help introduce these concepts to your students?
Yeah, the training practices, I think, I wouldn't really call it like, I wouldn't really say I added something, but then maybe it's also not true. I have to think about it. Like, for example, you might see some of the kettlebells lying around. I don't know. But this is like, I basically use them like a Taiji ball. I just didn't find heavy balls, or balls which are like heavy enough. So I thought, okay, let's get a kettlebell. So because you can get them in all different weight forms, right? Mm-hmm. It's like very easy to just buy them. But I wouldn't really call it like I added something. But then and stuff like this is sometimes, or sometimes I use maces and stuff. But I mean, this is also, or I got an Indian club, but I'm not really using it much. But sometimes I'm just throwing it around in a Taiji way. But I wouldn't say I added something. You know, it's like also like, you know, Chen Yu, he's the same. Like I know he sometimes he has like elastic bands. He got him somewhere and then he's doing something with it. You know, it's like, I think it's in a way it is traditional. You know, you see things lying around and then you think, okay, how can I make use of it and somehow train my body using the Taiji, you know, the structural ideas and the movement ideas. And, so these strengthening methods are not really, it's difficult to say. I wouldn't say they are like the core part of the curriculum, but in a way it's very natural that almost everybody who's doing the style will pick up these things and just do something with the same ideas and methodologies to strengthen their bodies, you know? So, I think it's really a very normal thing in this kind of style. So I wouldn't say I added anything, but surely I probably added some tools. I can't really think of them at the moment. And the other part of your question, sorry,
Oh, that's okay. Maybe to go along with what you're saying with the tools and stuff, I guess I'd call that play within the framework of Tai Chi. So you're kind of playing and exploring with the tools, but around the model of what is your Tai Chi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for example, like, I mean, people are using strengthening methods in many different ways, and there are probably a lot of good ways. There are also some ways, of course, which are not very good for the body. So whenever I take something heavy, I would try to maintain the Taiji structure in the sense that it's stable, but it's also loose in the sense of it can move. You know, for example, like if I took strengthening methods and I used it to stiffen up my core, for example, I think it would not be very beneficial for Taijiquan, because then I could basically forget all the dantian, the core work, which we do in Taijiquan. So I don't want to stiffen up the core, right? So I have to find a way to stabilize the core, like in Taiji, and still pick up something heavy and lift it or turn it around or whatever. So this is like just what you say, like playing around with exactly the same ideas in the same framework, but whatever tool comes into, you can basically use every tool you want to use.
And then the other part of the question was, have you taken any of your drills, anything that you've learned from Chen Yu in your curriculum, and been like, this thing here is enormous, whatever it may be, and maybe broken it down into smaller sections or ways to explain whatever this concept or drill is to introduce to your students?
Yes. I mean, the way Chen Yu is teaching is also, it's very, there's one, like you could say there's a standardized version, but there's also a very individual version. So the standardized version is like, you know, you have to learn sort of the frame. So understand, okay, what are we doing here? What are the jins we want to produce, etc. But at some point, Chen Yu will also tell you, use your brains, you know, like, don't ask me. I can't tell you everything. Just I'm teaching you, you know, and now go on and use your brain. So, for example, he might be teaching you a dansha, like a drill, but then he doesn't have to teach you all 1,000 drills because you couldn't remember them anyway. So, but you take them from the form, you extract them from the form, and you build your own drills. You know, and this is like how the style. It stays traditional, the methodologies stay intact, but they are not dead in the sense that you just copy someone, but they are living, right? So he's teaching you the method how to do it. And then you have to kind of use your own brain. So this is definitely something I do. And then, of course, you develop as a teacher. So I think in the beginning, I was just mainly teaching myself really not to forget anything. So maybe my students were not so important. No, I'm saying it half. Yeah.
Oh, that's okay. We get you. 100%. Yeah.
Been there.
No,
But
it's great.
you need to make sure that you as a teacher, if I adapted too much to my students in the beginning years, I would have forgotten a lot. Nowadays, it doesn't really matter so much. I'm not forgetting this stuff anymore, So now I can. So depending also on what kind of questions the students ask and so on, I will take a method and then surely I'll split it into different parts, learning parts and so on, and try to make it more accessible. And this is surely different from how exactly my teacher taught me, but sometimes I cannot even tell you, Like I did an online class on breathing, and then you're kind of going along, right? So, and then I took it really apart, and I didn't really think too much about it beforehand. Yeah. Mm-hmm. They don't tell my students, but I go with my own feeling, with my own, okay, what am I doing here? And then I just take it step by step. And this might be different. Like if I taught a class now and if I taught it in 3 years' time, it would probably be quite different, but it would be different from how my teacher would maybe break it down. But of course, it will share a lot of similarities, but the breakdown would be different,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to look at those sorts of things as sort of once you internalize the principles in your body, then you can sort of extrapolate or talk about them on the fly as you need to, because they're all what you're talking about and you're breaking down or extrapolating is all within the context of the principles.
Yeah, perfect. Much better said. You pick up.
No. I was just making sure. I was making sure that I heard you correctly.
No.
Going back to what we were talking about with tools and sort of and things like that. I was wondering, we were talking specifically about the kettlebells, and I was wondering if the weapons play sort of a similar role, or if their sort of intention is to train something that we haven't discussed a little bit.
Yeah, the weapons are definitely, they have a very similar role, I'd say. It really depends also on most people don't really learn the weapon forms, right? Like, because it's just a lot of if you have a very little practice time, the less practice time you have, the more you should train core contents, right? So, and the more training time you have, the more you can add auxiliary training things or supplementary training things. But the less time you have, definitely you should spend more time on the core, on the main, contents. So I don't think too many people will come to learn several weapon forms, right? But I think, you maybe you can see it around, we have the long poles here, right? So, and then you have the heavy maces, or even like a heavy. If you train with a real sword, for example, it's good training for the body. Of course, if you have only the wushu, the very flexible light ones, it's more to demonstrate and to show off a bit. But for training, if you have heavy weapons, it's definitely very good. Yeah, you have to be a bit careful that you're not becoming too one-sided. Like training only the left or only the right. But that also, it's a bit different for everyone. For me personally, I have to be careful about it to get some symmetry into my body, and not only to train my right hand all the time with a heavy glaive or whatever. So, but everybody's a bit different there. I think that really depends on individually coaching someone and supporting them in a way to develop these skills.